All right, the Autumn blocks axle, and this is the first one from part 2 of activity 55B. And this is built as a revolve around a center line. So what we're going to do is draw half the profile and then revolve that around this center line. So I'm going to start with that. Let's make sure we use the origin and go ahead and dimension that center line to 0.88. Now you wouldn't have to dimension the center line, but the reason that I'm doing that is to give me some perspective when I eyeball and draw my sketch. So now, in order to make that a center line, I'm going to select the line by clicking on it, and then it's right up here below construction line is where we can add a center line. And then I'll just click outside that line somewhere, and we want to make sure that center line is no longer active, because when I start drawing the rest of my lines, I don't want it to be active. And then I'm going to eyeball my parts, making sure I don't click the green point in the middle, because then that would be constrained to some geometry. So I'm just going to move over and just start eyeballing what this sketch looks like. I'm not really too concerned if it's not to scale, because I'm going to go back and add all my dimensions. So let's just kind of eyeball that. The one part I'm going to exaggerate is that taper. Okay, and that's exaggerating that is going to make the whole sketch a little bit easier to do. So again, I am not concerned about what all these dimensions are. I'm just getting everything sketched in. And we do want to make sure that the shape is enclosed. So you notice there is an object line that I just sketched there on top of the center line. Okay, at this point I'm going to pause the video for the sake of time and add all my width dimensions. All right, let's go back and add a couple more constraints. I added all my width dimensions as dimensioned in the sketch, but let's lock a few more things in. I want to make sure with the coincident constraint that this line is lined up with the end. Okay, and you'll notice a bunch of my lines turn blue then. And then with a collinear constraint, this line down here is not blue yet. That one should be directly under that line there. Okay, so we could have done that with a numerical constraint, but it's just lined up with geometry in the sketch. So, okay, now the reason we have that center line there is to have be able to put those diameters in. So from this line to here is 0.19. So you'll notice that moves into place, and that's giving the diameter instead of the radius then for when we're going to revolve this. And that's 0.25. That line to there is 0.29. So it's starting to give it some shape. We'll go over to the other side. 0.19. .25. 0.3. And then, let's see, the other thing we need is that 0.3 is also the distance from here to here. So I could make that a coincident. Let's make that point coincident with that line. And then the dimension from this line to that point, the vertical distance, if I drag sideways, is 10,000ths of an inch, 0.01. And then my final dimension, of course, is my overall diameter. Whoops, I want to click the center line. .4. Okay, so there's the axle fully sketched. And that's exactly as it's drawn on the directions. So we'll go ahead and finish the sketch and do a revolve. And Inventor's pretty smart. It sees your center line already because we drew the center line, so we don't even have to select it. It'll guesses that we want to do a full revolve. Okay, and then the last couple of steps, I like to use geometry to do some of these things, but the last couple of steps we want to cut a little slot which will allow the rectangle to flex. So I'm going to first draw my rectangle. That slot that we're going to extrude is 40 thousandths. Oh, and that's not ending up where I want it to, so that should be tangent to the top of the circle. And then to make sure that it will get centered, that I can cut away, that endpoint should be on the inner circle, and that endpoint should also be on the inner circle, so that centers up the slot. And then if you want to, you could draw that again, but I like using geometry, so let's make that a construction line. And then we should be able to mirror the rectangle down to the other side, which is a little bit faster than doing the dimensions. So now we can go select those two squares and cut a distance of 0.2 of an inch. So there's the axle.